Hello and welcome back to another video. In today's video, we're going to be talking about everything to do with Bitcoin and cryptocurrency adoption rates. Before we dive into today's topic though, as always, please make sure you hit the thumbs up button below. It really helps with the algorithm. I would be super grateful. Please make sure you are subscribed if you're not already, and make sure that you turn on notifications so you can stay up to date with everything in the cryptocurrency space. So today's topic is everything to do with adoption and adoption rates. And what we're going to look at first is basically the technology adoption or the innovation adoption life cycle. This framework is not unique to Bitcoin or cryptocurrency, but this is more of a framework that's used to observe how people will adopt new technologies over the course of its lifetime. And what normally happens is you've got the very early innovators who are people at the very forefront of wanting to adopt something new, the people who are extremely enthusiastic about that new technology. This curve applies to, all different types of emerging technologies that we'll look at in a moment, such as, let's say, the smartphone or the internet or DVDs or VHR. So obviously in the very early stages, you've got innovators who are going to be the most enthusiastic people to adopt a completely new technology. Then you've got the early adopters or the visionaries who are, maybe not quite as enthusiastic about the innovators, but still very early in the game and understand the potential of the new technology. Then we've got the pragmatists, which are the early majority. So when the floodgates start to open, these are the people who are kind of the fast followers who will latch on to the early majority of people who adopt the technology. Then we've got the late majority, or the conservatives, who are, very much on the erring on the side of caution side of things, where they want to see basically large majorities of people already adopting something before they're going to consider it. And then obviously the last cohort we've got are the skeptics or the laggards, who make up the final 16%. Generally, these are the people who are very much against this technology or who are very skeptical about any benefits associated with it and will almost reluctantly adopt that technology because so many people have already adopted it and it's gained a network effect in the market. So this is the bell curve that kind of represents all these technologies being adopted over time. And the chasm that we have here kind of represents this leap that technologies need to make in order to really scale and achieve mass adoption. Because if only that initial 16% of people adopt a technology and it does not make its way into that early majority, ultimately it may not succeed. It may not gain enough traction to garner mass adoption. So that's what the chasm represents here in the innovation adoption lifecycle. So how does this all apply to Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies? So Statista estimates that global crypto ownership stands at about 3.8% as of the end of 2023, up from 3.4% in 2022. And that number is expected to grow to global cryptocurrency adoption rates of just over 4% in the year 2024, where we are now. So still very, very early days. And I think that's the main point that I want to make in this video, is that we are extremely early in the life cycle of this new technology. Obviously, the opportunity will not last forever, and you need to think about where we are in this macro life cycle and the macro adoption phases that we will go through. And obviously, as with any technology, those innovators and early adopters are the ones that serve to gain the most from being early to the opportunity, being early to investing, and being early to use the new technology. So obviously, if we think about where that stands on the map here, we are somewhere around, at the very early point of the early adopters phase. We've gotten over the 2.5% global adoption. We're probably in the early stages of the visionaries and the early adopters here as we move towards the chasm. And I think a lot of the market sentiment over the next 12 to 18 months might help us get closer and closer to the chasm and ultimately making that leap over the chasm, because we've gotten ETF approval in the past couple of weeks at the start of January 2024. That's going to bring a huge amount more of institutional money into this market. And as we move towards the halving later this year and move towards the next 18 to 24 months in this space, it will be extremely interesting to see, you know, how much adoption we're going to get from the visionaries in this next cycle. So next up, we've got the adoption of technology in the US to kind of compare Bitcoin to how we've seen the adoption of other technologies over time. And we've looked at this graph in other videos on this channel, but the main point that we want to make here is just how early we are once again. So we can see the Bitcoin adoption rate here versus other technologies over the course of the past 120 years. And what you'll notice here is the different colors on the map represent different types of technologies that have been adopted over this period. So starting off very early days in the early 1900s with things like the telephone, we've got the automobile, we've got the light bulb, we've got television, coming in the 1940s, 50s, 60s and beyond. And what you'll notice here with these adoption rates is that they start off quite slow and then they begin to kind of gain traction and gain mass adoption at a certain point in time and then begin to level out with the S-curve. So the other thing to note here is as we move through time and as we move towards the kind of 1980s, 1990s, 2000s and beyond, what we see here is with the adoption of these newer technologies like the internet, like the smartphone, like the tablet, like these other, like the television, what we see is a much sharper rate of adoption. So these trends in the early 1900s, they were much slower to gain mass adoption. But as we've moved towards the 1990s and beyond, these newer technologies have a much more rapid rate of adoption and they are much faster to gain market saturation versus the technologies of the previous, 70 to 80 years. So that seems to be a trend that's happened here with, the internet, the digital camera, the smartphone, HD television. And I think what we're going to see is something extremely similar with Bitcoin over the next 5 to 10 years. We're going to see much more parabolic growth, much more mass adoption of Bitcoin and some of the other winning cryptocurrencies in the space. So very interesting just to think about how Bitcoin compares to these other technologies and how adoption is happening. So where is adoption happening? And obviously, the number we mentioned a few minutes ago with Statista estimating that we will hit about 4% global adoption is based on, having about, I think, 300 million people who have adopted cryptocurrency worldwide, obviously with a population of just under 8 billion. So when we think about certain specific markets, obviously certain countries have much higher rates of adoption than others. So what we're looking at here is grassroots adoption rates, where India, Nigeria, Vietnam and the US have the highest adoption rates per capita versus other countries and nation states. So obviously market adoption varies dramatically by country, and it's also very interesting to see how certain emerging markets like India, Nigeria, Vietnam potentially are seeing the opportunities here that Bitcoin and cryptocurrency can have in the long run and are making moves to adopt this technology, perhaps to gain a foothold in this entirely new ecosystem and position themselves to benefit from the growth of this industry over the next 5 to 10 years. The other thing we're going to mention here is the Lindy effect. And in short, the Lindy effect basically states that the future life expectancy of a non-perishable thing, such as a technology, is proportional to its current age. So basically that means that the longer something has been around, the chances are the longer it will survive. This obviously is not always the case, but an example with something like the Bible, let's say, is the Bible has been around for, let's say, 2,000 years. The Lindy effect would say that because it's been around for 2,000 years, it will last for another 2,000 years. So applying this to different types of technologies, we can think about the Lindy effect in the context of Bitcoin, where because of the fact that Bitcoin has been around for 15 years, it will therefore be around for at least 15 more years. So, it's debatable how effective the Lindy effect is for measuring the success of new technologies. The other thing the Lindy effect and Lindy cycles helps us think about is how different technologies usurp other technologies. So if we think about the example with, let's say, VHS and the DVD, obviously the DVD at a certain point in time usurped the VHS and became a better technology for people to use versus the VHS. And the idea here is that any new technology needs to be an order of magnitude better than its predecessor in order to truly replace it or usurp it. So the idea, again, is thinking about, let's say, the example of the DVD and the VHS. DVD was so much more light and portable and offered new features versus VHS, its predecessor, that it was an order of magnitude better, or 10x a better experience versus VHS, that it ultimately replaced it and became better. Taking that a step further, in that same example, online streaming or Netflix, obviously that is such an order of magnitude more efficient and better than having to get a physical DVD and run it in an external device. Streaming means you just need an internet connection and you can stream a movie or stream a television show. It's such an order of magnitude more efficient and better than its predecessor that it ultimately completely usurps it. So again, we can look at the Lindy effect through the lens of, it can, Bitcoin has been around for 15 years, so it can last therefore another 15 years. And or, does Bitcoin have an order of magnitude greater capability than traditional fiat currencies, that it will ultimately usurp and replace traditional fiat over time? So just an interesting thought experiment to think about the different ways in which this technology is being adopted and how it can continue to be adopted over time. So the next thing that we're going to look at, and the final thing we're going to look at, is internet adoption versus cryptocurrency adoption. And again, just to kind of emphasize how early we are again in this trajectory of this new technology, what we're seeing here is total internet users in green versus total crypto users in blue. And obviously the green line for internet user adoption is being mapped from 1990 to 2000. So that decade saw huge amount of growth in terms of internet users and the adoption of the internet. And the trend line for cryptocurrency adoption is being mapped from 2014 to 2024. And obviously what we're seeing is a correlation in terms of the adoption of this technology and how the internet was being adopted at that rate, and the rate at which cryptocurrency is being adopted and the amount of users in this space as we trend towards 1 billion users. So again, depending on how old you are, how many people did you know that were adopting the internet in 96, 97? That was the early days. That was when the first people were getting online. That's when the personal computing revolution was really gaining mass traction and mass adoption. And I think it's very interesting to compare Bitcoin adoption and cryptocurrency adoption to that same life cycle and how the correlation maps for these two different gigantic technologies. So I think the main point of this video is really to just once again emphasize how early we are in the adoption of Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies. We could have gone into much more detail about, number of wallet addresses and all that kind of stuff in this video, but I wanted to keep it more macro level to really paint the picture of how early we are, and still being at, just around this 4% global adoption mark. The opportunity is there for you to take, but the opportunity is not going to be there forever. And it's definitely worth considering the strategy that you want to execute or implement over the next 5 to 10 years to be early mover in this space, and what are the asymmetric bets that you can make to give yourself the best upside over the next 5 to 10 years. So once again, we are extremely early in this space. The opportunity will not be there forever, but it's worth, looking at some of this information and some of this data and how the technology is being adopted and how we are set for, increased adoption rates over the next 5 to 10 years and where that will bring us in terms of price and mass adoption. So as always, if you enjoy these videos, make sure you are subscribed below. Make sure you hit the bell notification to get up-to-date information on everything in the crypto space. Give the video a thumbs up, and we will see you in the next one.